Your flight takes off. As it climbs into the rising sun, you wonder, is the in-flight meal chicken or fish? But guess what? It doesn't matter. You're not actually on the flight. No, you're on a new journey, a different kind of trip. You did the crime, and now it's time to do the time in Japanese prison. Now as you're led down the hallway to your new home for the next 2 years, fear sets in. Japan's prison system operates on strict rules and a vastly different culture than the US, and you have no idea what's in store. Is this going to be one of those nightmare scenarios of an American in a foreign jail, or could it actually be as nice and clean as the hotel you stayed in? It's time to experience your first 24 hours in a Japanese prison on this episode of The Infographic Show. Okay, so ignoring those customs instructions might not have been your best move. Let's just say your attempts to bring a few souvenirs back from visiting family in Japan didn't go unnoticed. It was probably the Japanese flying squirrels in your suitcase that raised a few eyebrows. But hey, your girlfriend wanted a real souvenir, and plushies just weren't cutting it. Turns out trying to be a good boyfriend doesn't fly in court. Now you're headed up the river. American citizens arrested abroad often get a hand from their government. But Japan has a justice system with a solid reputation, so don't expect a diplomatic rescue. Besides, you definitely, absolutely did it. You have no idea what to expect. Well, that's not quite true. Unlike the American prison system, the Japanese penal system is very strictly regulated and overseen. Japanese pretrial detention is fairly fast-paced and efficient. Suspects are detained for up to 48 hours unless an extension is requested. You pled guilty because they pretty much caught you dead to rights smuggling, and you were hoping for leniency. But the judge wasn't feeling it that day. It was all over pretty quickly, and your fate was determined. And then it was off to school. One of the most unique elements of the Japanese prison system is that before you go, you're placed in an orientation program that lasts 15 days. During this time, you are not in the general population, and you spend most of your time being briefed on the rules and the schedule of your new life. It feels more like a military academy than a prison so far, but you're worried that that's about to change. And that's because you're headed to one of the most infamous and largest penitentiaries in Japan, Fuchu Prison. Most of the inmates here are in for the long haul, 10 years or more. You quickly realize you're one of the few serving a relatively light sentence. But that doesn't make things any easier in a place like this. As you're escorted out of the orientation quarters and led toward the general population in Fuchu Prison, you're immediately struck by the sheer scale of the place. With over 1,200 inmates and a capacity of more than 2,700, this facility is packed. And you're just one face among the almost 60 nationalities housed here, many of which have past prison records. When you first came in, you went through a search, but now it's time for round 2. A much more intense search to ensure you're not bringing in any well-hidden contraband. This time, the Japanese guards conduct the search with a precision that feels almost rehearsed. Bend over and cough. This isn't your first time in a holding cell, so it's not your first time getting a full search. The Japanese guards seem more in control of the situation than the American guards did when they caught you joyriding in your dad's truck. They gave you clear instructions and they didn't have to make threats. But from the steely look in their eyes, you get the distinct impression that you had better obey very carefully. You've already given up your possessions at intake, and you'll get them back when you're released. Well, except for the squirrels. So now it's time to meet the company. You watched plenty of prison dramas over the years, so you're expecting the worst. Will they be chanting "new fish" in Japanese? You saw some of your fellow new prisoners in the orientation, but there was no chance for interaction. Silence was required all around. You don't know whether they're ordinary schlubs like you or hardened criminals. As you're led down the hallway to your cell, you wait for outbursts of violence and threats, but they don't come. In fact, the entire place is a little too quiet for your tastes. But you're going to be getting a lot of company very soon. The biggest shock you get is when you arrive at your cell. This isn't a standard cell with bars and 2 cots for you and your cellie to bicker over. Rather, it's a stark room that looks more like a ward in a mental hospital or a military barracks. And the other big surprise is how many people are in it. 6. Most prisoners in Japan are held in communal cells, although high risk and some foreign prisoners are held separately. As you're a non-violent prisoner without any political complications to your case, and you speak Japanese, you suppose they decided you're suitable for the general population. You look around and your roommates look like a combination of Japanese prisoners and foreign ones. Prisons in Japan are far more segregated than prisons in the US and many other countries. That means you're not going to be housed with the most hardcore prisoners. They're gathered by the type of penalty, the length of sentence, and how dangerous they're seen as to the guards and other prisoners. And that means you're likely to be housed with other non-violent criminals, many of whom are first-time offenders. And from a look at the faces around you, they've all been through this procedure a few times before. Haruto has wound up here for a 10-year stint due to a series of high-value robberies. Kenji was involved with a gang riot as a young man and is more than halfway through a 6-year sentence. Akihiko is the oldest inmate here and was caught running an elaborate insider trading ring and is serving 5 years. Daichi was on the lookout for his older brother during an armed robbery and got 4 years after cooperating with the police. And Jürgen is a German tourist whose vacation in Japan was extended by 7 years after being caught with drugs. It's kind of like a camp bunk, only a lot more miserable. So you puff up your chest and say, "Yeah, I was caught in a smuggling ring. Got 2 years." They don't need to know about the squirrels. Now you all know each other's crimes and they all seem fine, but a part of you is still worried. There isn't a lot of space here and you're sure you're going to get on each other's nerves. You remember sharing a bedroom with 5 cousins at Christmas. It was a total brawl within hours. How long until this place turns into a Japanese smackdown tournament? Months, weeks, or maybe you're already in it. People do step out of line in Japanese prisons, and they usually regret it. In American prisons, the guards feel omnipresent. You remember being woken up by them banging their nightsticks on the bars. Felt like they wanted someone to screw up so they could make an example of them. But here they almost blend into the background, and that's because good behavior is expected here. They drilled this into you repeatedly during orientation. The prison runs on a military-style system of discipline, with everyone wearing the same uniform and following a very strict schedule. And like in the military, you rise together or you fall together. The reason Japanese prisons house inmates together is because, to a large degree, the discipline here is enforced not by the guards, but by fellow inmates. If one inmate steps out of line, the whole cell could lose privileges, so it is fairly common for the 5 inmates who aren't plotting anything to report misbehavior. Or it might be quicker to intimidate their wayward roommate back into the straight and narrow. So, in some ways, you don't have 5 roommates, you have 5 more experienced guards who are not going to let you pull any funny business. But you might not have the time for funny business. One of the biggest culture shocks about Japanese prison is that everything is structured down to the minute. While in American prison, boredom was your biggest enemy. Your cellmate didn't like it when you started whistling your favorite songs from The Simpsons. Here, you're going to be kept very busy. It starts only a short time after you've been brought to your cell for the first time and met your roommates. Only a few minutes later, a guard is knocking on your cell door and everyone inside snaps to attention. It's time for roll call. The guards briskly take notes that everyone is here, dressed, and ready for their day to begin. Everyone quickly snaps to attention, and even though it takes you a few more seconds, it's not noticed. You're led down the hall because it's chow time. As a foreign prisoner in Japan, you had a few choices to make, including your diet inside. Foreign prisoners are given the choice of a rice-based diet or a bread-based diet more suited to Western tastes. Vegetarian and halal options are also available, but this is a one-way choice. No switching later on, except in extenuating circumstances. You actually chose to have the standard diet because you didn't know about the quality of special requests. And this is another surprise right out of the gate. It's not terrible. Japanese prisons are controversial for a lot of reasons, but the food is not one of them. They're actually considered to have one of the best prison diets in the world, certainly better than the United States. Meals are carefully designed for suitable nutrition and calorie needs and have a good variety. It's not always pleasure. For breakfast, you're served a simple meal of rice, fish, and pickled vegetables. It certainly is the furthest thing from the McGriddle you're craving right now, but it does the job. And it had better because it's work time. You won't have time to get bored in Japanese prison because you'll be busy doing your new job. What's that? Whatever the prison sees fit. While prison labor is common across the world, including in the US, it serves 2 purposes in Japan. The goal is to keep the inmates occupied, teach them useful skills, and produce goods. Some of the common trades taught in prison include auto repair, carpentry, woodworking, leather work, typography, and dry cleaning. These are in-house assignments, although inmates who are serving longer sentences and have had time to build trust may be outsourced to factories to complete their labor. And it is not optional. While you're locked up, you'll be working a full 8-hour day in prison, and for your initial assignment, you'll be in woodworking. You're given a quick tutorial on the patterns you'll be making, as well as the machine you'll be using. Seems easy enough to master, and you'll be doing it a lot. You get confused a few times and have some pieces have to be thrown away, but you figure you shouldn't be asking for any help. Everyone here looks pretty plugged in. It's been a long day. At least it's already 9 a.m. At 9:45, it's time for a quick break. You're able to get something to drink, stretch your legs, and relax all under the watchful eye of your guards. Before you know it, the signal rings again, and it's back to work. This is the second part of your shift, and you'll be working until noon. It's boring work, but it's manageable. But one of the most surprising parts of it is how utterly quiet it was. When you were doing work in detail during one of your stays in Juvie Hall, the kids were constantly chatting and arguing. The shouts of "back to work" by the guards were even louder. Not here. Everyone is working in unison, barely making a peep. And after what feels like forever, it's time for another break. You're headed for lunch, and you're actually a little excited by what awaits you. You're getting the impression that food might be one of the few highlights of your time here. Think of it as your own Japanese restaurant experience. If you couldn't leave and the chef just picked out whatever looked interesting that day. Your hands are starting to ache after the first part of your shift, and you could use the energy. It's a simple plate of teriyaki chicken and a mildly sweet sauce with some grilled vegetables and more rice. It's enjoyable enough, but you're starting to miss a Philly cheesesteak. However, you suspect that that was not one of the offerings on the bread-based menu. From there, it's time to return to work, but you're in for a surprise. As it's your first day and your responses to quizzes about your aptitude in orientation was, I don't know, the management's decided to switch you around. You suspect that your reaction time in woodworking was a little too slow, so they decided to switch you into auto repair, where you'll be working with a team. Your job here is more familiar. You've changed plenty of tires in your day, and your assembly line is soon a well-oiled machine. Under the watchful eye of the guards, of course, you have a feeling you'll be fine here. Because you'll be doing this a lot. You were briefed by your duties in orientation, and this is essentially a full-time job. You'll be working 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and 4 hours on Saturday. For this, you'll be paid a mighty sum of around $30 a month, which will be held in escrow for you. Hey, at least it's something, and you're not paying for room and board. In many ways, it hasn't really sunk in for you that you're in prison. You haven't spent much time in a cell, and you're being kept busy. Your cellmates seem okay too. And now it's time for dinner. There's a sense of novelty to what you're getting from this different culture. Dinner fits into a similar pattern. It's a pork katsu cutlet, which is kind of like a schnitzel with a lighter breading, with steamed vegetables and of course a decent portion of rice. It tastes good, but you get the feeling that you're going to become very familiar with these dishes over the next 2 years. They're all designed to give you a combo of major food groups suited to the Japanese diet, and there is a reason they call it a rice-based diet. Now it's time for what you've been looking forward to all day, some time off. Your work detail is done for the day, so you return to your cell. For well-behaved inmates, this is the one time of the day when some brief tastes of comfort and relaxation are allowed. Unlike in American prisons, there isn't much emphasis on outdoor exercise. After all, you've been working for most of the day, so instead this is essentially quiet time. Inmates have access to television and radio during this period, assuming they can agree what to watch or listen to. You're letting your cellmates pick this time. You don't want to make any waves. Besides, you got your own entertainment. Before being officially taken in, you're given the chance to select up to 10 books for entertainment. You managed to get most of your picks, though a few were vetoed and for being a bit too spicy for prison standards. Turns out the prison has a strict ban on anything deemed pornographic or detrimental to public morale. You're also briefed on some upcoming enrichment activities, from group exercise hours to motivational talks on bouncing back after prison. One thing is clear, the prison is designed to rehabilitate you, or at least that's the plan. And you're going to learn stuff whether you like it or not. There are a few catches to your recreation here, like the fact that everything has to be done in Japanese. You're really lucky that you listened to your mom's Japanese lessons growing up, although some accommodations are allowed for foreign prisoners who are in their own units. You see, Jürgen has books in German, although he seems to know enough Japanese to converse with the other inmates. Now to settle in and unwind from a long and confusing first day in prison. Well, at least you would if it wasn't for the shouting from down the hall. You sit up with a start and watch as a young Japanese man is roughly dragged down the hall by several guards, struggling to get free. The illusion of order has been shattered, but none of your fellow inmates look startled. Daichi just mutters under his breath, "Looks like another couldn't handle it," and everyone else nods. You get the feeling that they've all had their own brushes with the guards, well, except for maybe Akihiko, who looks like he really wants to get back to his corner office. But the younger inmates can tell you don't know what awaits the unfortunate inmate, and they can't wait to tell you. It's scary story time. The thing about Japanese prison is it's peaceful and tightly regimented. There is plenty of opportunities for growth and learning if you keep to the straight and narrow. The second you veer from the schedule, the system comes down on you like a ton of bricks. For inmates who disrupt the order, punishment often means solitary confinement in a protection cell, supposedly for those posing a risk to themselves or others. This typically involves heavy restraints, handcuffs, and intense isolation. Multiple organizations have raised concerns that Japan's reliance on such extreme measures to keep order may be edging into civil rights violations, and you might be one of the lucky ones. Daichi hasn't had much interaction with his brother since the older robber got 15 years, but what communication he had with him indicates that you guys have it easy. Violent criminals are definitely not treated with kid gloves in Japan. Time out of the cell is much more limited, routine is more strictly regimented, and high-security inmates are often heavily isolated. For death row cases, the inmates live in near total isolation and don't even know when their execution will be. You picked up that little detail from an episode of your favorite YouTube channel. Maybe it should have given you a hint to stay out of prison here. And you really don't want to wind up having a close encounter with the guards of your own. You hear a slam of a door down the hall, and you know you probably won't be hearing from that one inmate for a little while. If he pulls himself together, he'll probably be back on the main floor soon enough. If not, he could find himself upgraded to a higher level of security full-time. Suddenly your cell feels a little smaller, and the book that you've been reading no longer holds much interest. This is the first time you've had all day to really be alone with your thoughts, and your situation is weighing on you. Your first day in a Japanese prison is just about over, and the next one will likely be almost exactly the same. Routine is king in Japanese prison, and for those who want to get through their sentence, it's best to learn the routine fast. Now, you've just got to do this about 729 more times. That's a whole lot of rice. Could you handle the strict rules of a Japanese prison? What do you think would be the hardest part of the first 24 hours inside? Drop a comment below. Want to know more about the end of the line for the hardest of hard-timers in the US? Check out why you wouldn't survive a Supermax prison, or watch Diddy's life inside NYC hellhole jail to see how even celebrities aren't safe from hard time.